Well, good evening. This evening is tonight's the first evening of the next series of events that we're holding. It is new to solar and batteries. By way of acknowledgement of country, I acknowledge the Kaurna people whose country I am joining you from, and I pay respects to elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationships with the land. And I encourage you to write in the chat function the nation that you are joining us from tonight. Tonight is part of a larger series of events in collaboration with the regional climate partnerships. By name, they are Adapt West, Resilient East, Resilient South, and Resilient Hills and Coasts. My name is John Hurd. I'm from the city of Gully, and tonight I'm representing the Resilient East steering group. And it's a pleasure to join you to tonight's as we explore solar and battery technology for those of us who are keen to know where to start and key things to consider when taking that leap. A little bit about the webinar functions for those who are perhaps not so familiar with Zoom and chat. The chat function, on the bottom you'll see a toolbar. You'll click that and that should bring up a chat function. That will enable you to put a Q or a question, in that box. Type it in there, and you can do that throughout the session. And as we get past after the presentation, there'll be 20 to 30 minutes of opportunity to ask or verbalise those questions, and I'm happy to convene that. You can also raise your hand in case you need some tech support, in which case our handy tech support John will race to your help. At the end, like I said, there'll be up to a half hour of questions and answers, so please use the chat function for that purpose. This webinar is recorded and it will be available on websites, on council websites, for you to review and share. And so if you don't get it all in the first view, you can come back to it and it's all there for you. So now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Andrew Reddaway, who you may have seen in a previous webinar, All Electric Homes. Andrew is an analyst who's been involved with Renew for over 10 years, helping households with independent energy advice. He's also worked for the Australian Energy Market Operator and the Australian Energy Foundation, and also NHAR. He is trained in solar installations and is certified in passive house design. Thank you, Andrew, and I'll hand it to you now.
Thanks a lot for that. Yeah, great to be involved, and yeah, I hope everyone can hear me okay. If you have any issues, then please just put a message in the chat, like any sort of technical issues. So I'm just going to try and share screen here for the presentation. Okay, hopefully that's coming through okay. Someone will let me know if it's not, I'm sure. I do apologise, we have had a couple of little IT issues in the background here, so bear with us if we have a few glitches tonight, but it should be all good now. I think we've got everything online. All right, so what we're going to cover is why solar, how does it work, information on rebates, feed-in tariffs, and how to get the most out of it, and then similar for the battery side of it, and at the end talking about buying one of these systems and how to make sure you get the best and most reliable deal. Okay, now before we jump into the technology and the solar and the batteries, it's always a good idea to be aware of what type of electricity plan you're on. So what type of retail tariff with your electricity retailer, and gas actually as well, if you use mains gas. So Energy Made Easy is the government website to help find different plans and compare them. There's also a whole bunch of commercial sites, but they don't necessarily show all the plans that you might be interested in, or the best ones. I'm going to move reasonably fast, and because I know we've got a lot of questions. There was a big list of questions that were sent through prior to the event, and I think we've got a fairly high number of participants as well. So I'll try and leave a reasonable amount of time at the end for answering people's questions. So yeah, here's a couple of other comparison sites for electricity and gas plans. Another thing to keep in mind is we're mostly going to be talking about generating electricity with solar panels and then storing it with batteries. But even better than generating electricity to meet your consumption is if you can save energy in the first place. So the picture here is an example of insulation in a roof space. So with a nice fluffy insulation on top of the plasterboard in the ceiling, and they've also got some insulation that might be foil insulation under the roofing there. But yeah, energy efficiency includes a whole lot of different stuff as well, hot water and yeah, all sorts of ways that you can save energy around the home. Okay, so why solar? Well, sustainability. So there's a direct environmental benefit of solar. So we have an electricity system where electricity gets shared around instantaneously. So there's always a balance between supply and demand in the grid. So anytime that you're generating electricity and yeah, that's going to be reducing how much electricity needs to come from centralized generation sources. So for South Australia, that may be gas, for example. If gas-fired generation is running, then it may be able to ease off a bit and reduce the amount of greenhouse gases emitted. Or it could be electricity being imported into South Australia from Victoria through the interconnectors, which is often brown coal generated in Victoria. So yeah, that's one of the clear benefits of rooftop solar. Now, let's just a quick overview of economics. So you're probably going to get economic payback in South Australia of around 4 to 5 years. Now, all of this is just rough averages, okay? Maybe because every household is different, and we see some households that have swimming pools with the usual pool filter, or maybe even pool heating. We have households with heaps of electronic gadgets and servers and all sorts of things. There are houses that are into pottery and they have electric kilns in the backyard. The variety out there is way more than what it would have been like, say, 30, 40 years ago. So yeah, each situation is a bit different and that needs to be taken into account. But yeah, if we're talking about sort of rough averages across the whole sort of population, then these are the sorts of results we get. So yeah, South Australia does get really good economic benefits from solar compared to other states. And the reasons for that are lots of sun, quite high retail electricity tariffs, so the amount you're paying for electricity from the grid, like per unit of energy. And solar systems are also relatively inexpensive here. The installation industry seems pretty efficient in South Australia. Oh, and the rebates are fairly good as well, which is a side effect of having lots of sun. So the prices of solar systems, they've come down a whole heap since 2012. Yeah, I've got a solar system on my own roof here. It was back in 2011, and yes, you did pay a lot more per panel back then, or per amount of power generation. But on the other hand, yeah, there were some generous feed-in tariffs back then that are not available to new entrants now. So it's a bit of a swings and roundabouts. But yeah, prices have leveled off a bit in the last year or two. So there's no real sort of factor there. It's just saying, oh, you have to get in now because solar panels are going to get really expensive, or vice versa. So that's fairly simple. Now, here's an example of prices for solar systems. And the table, if we just look at the title row there, it's talking about kilowatts, kW. So it's talking about the size of a solar system in kilowatts. So the most common solar system size would be probably either 6 kilowatts or 7 kilowatts. We're probably looking about 13 or 14 solar panels, like of the current type of solar panels that are being offered in the market. In Adelaide, you're looking at around $5,000 to $6,000, rough averages, basically. Now, that's going to vary if, like solar panels and the other components in the system, you have a range of brands, like with cars. You've got like your Mercedes and your BMWs, and you go down to some of your more budget kind of brands. And so it's a bit similar with these components as well. So if you're going for the more premium system, then you'll be more towards the higher end of the cost curve. And there are also some factors with your home, factors that can make it a bit more expensive. So, for example, if you have a tile roof, it's going to be a little bit more expensive than if you have a steel roof, like a ColourBond. Because with the tiles that they have to use a special stainless steel bracket that like goes up under the tile and then down and screws into the timber underneath. So yeah, that's extra materials with these special brackets, and also a bit more labor for them to adjust the tiles and make sure everything's going back in place and nice and sort of waterproof. With a steel roof, they're basically just going through the existing holes for the screws, so it's a lot quicker and easier for the installers. So that's just one example. If you got a double-story roof that they need to work on, and then they need special equipment, then obviously that's going to be a factor as well. If your house wiring is really old, or the switchboard's really old and it needs to be brought up to current standards, then that would be another factor that would impact the cost of your solar system. All right, so we're talking about solar electricity, also known as photovoltaic. So photo is the sun, voltaic is electricity. Not to be confused with solar hot water. So solar hot water, you've probably seen them. They normally have like two big panels side by side, and they're kind of black. Sometimes they have the water tank up on the top. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes the water tank's down at ground level. But those ones, all they do is they heat up from the sun and they heat up water. So they're like a one-trick pony, basically. With a solar electricity, that electricity can be used to heat up water in a water tank, but it can also be used for everything else. Or if you're generating an excess, then you can send that into the grid and earn some money, which you can't do with hot water. 44% of homes in South Australia. That's a stat from early July, so it'll already be more than that. So that's pretty impressive when you consider that'll include homes that are renting. So that can often be a bit of a barrier when it would be the landlord paying to put the system in, but it's the tenants that receive the bill savings. So that's a bit trickier than for an owner-occupier. And it would also include apartment blocks and strata titles that have some barriers to install solar as well. When you might have a whole bunch of apartments under the roof space. So the roof space is actually quite small per dwelling. Yes, it's true that most solar households are getting good return on their investment. That's well documented through it renews direct contact with consumers out there, all sorts of forums. Generally, the returns are good. If it's not, then there may be something wrong with the system and it's not generating as much as it should. But that's pretty rare. Batteries, which we'll come to later, we're only looking at about 1 in 7 solar installations having batteries. So they're still a bit of a niche product in the market. It's not like they're not like going in super commonly yet. So how does it work? Okay, so you've got your solar panels on the roof. Sunlight hits the solar panels. Cable takes the electricity down to a gadget called an inverter. So usually that's on the wall of the house, or it might be inside a garage, for example. That converts the electricity into the standard household electricity, which is 240 volts AC, alternating current. You've probably heard of that, or you've seen it on appliances and things, 230 volts or 240 volts, and sends that into the house switchboard. So then from there, your appliances are drawing electricity from the switchboard. If you're generating at the same time as your appliances are going, then it can feed it directly. And you also have a connection into your poles and wires in the grid, as you did before you got solar put on. So you've got 2 electricity supplies coming into your property, and they automatically balance each other out. So if you're generating more than what you're consuming through your appliances, then the excess automatically gets pushed out to the poles and wires, out to the grid. And if you're consuming more than what you're generating at any point in time, then you'll automatically be bringing in some power from the grid to supplement the solar and make up the difference. So it works quite nicely. Obviously at night time, then the solar's not generating and you're just importing from the grid. Consumption. I mentioned that. The grid, yep, I mentioned that too, sorry. A bit behind with my slides there. Okay, so there are some incentives around, some financial assistance to install solar. So the main one now is the small technology certificates, STCs. So this is a federal incentive, and it probably contributes to about a third reduction of the price of a system. One of the good things about this is everyone gets it. There's no eligibility criteria. So if anytime you're getting a quote for a solar system, it will already include this. So you don't have to worry about it. Taken care of by the installer. And this is being phased out gradually every year. So from 2015 up to 2030, the number of certificates is reducing by 1/15. So it's a nice gradual phase out, which is actually good, because there's been lots of cases where there are incentives that you get an announcement, okay, we're going to phase it out in 1 month, and then of course everyone piles in and installers get run off their feet, and then when so those sort of boom bust cycles are not great. So having this gradual sort of phase out is probably good. Now, a feed-in tariff. So when you are exporting more than you're consuming at a point in time, and you're pushing electrical power into the grid, then you get paid something for that. So the example they're showing here is 5 cents, and that's per kilowatt hour. So a kilowatt hour is a unit of electrical energy. So to give you an example of what a kilowatt hour is, if you ran a microwave oven for an hour, you'd probably get some very unpalatable food, and you would have used about 1 kilowatt hour of energy. Typical household might use 16, 18 kilowatt hours of electrical energy per day. So that gives you an idea. Now, there are often some questions about, hang on, if I'm importing electricity from the grid, I might be paying 40 cents per kilowatt hour, but when I export, I only get paid 5 cents. How can that be fair? That's a fairly obvious sort of question at face value. There are some valid reasons why the feed-in tariff is a lot lower than the tariff for when you're importing from the grid. So it does actually make sense, and it's a bit complicated. If anyone really wants to get into the whys and wherefores of that, then we can do it in the Q&A. Oh yeah, so you're going to get a credit on your bill. So when you've got solar, you get your quarterly electricity bill. It'll have all the usual sort of sections saying how much you've imported from the grid and how much you're paying for that. And we'll have another section saying, oh, and you've also exported this amount to the grid, and you're getting a credit off your bill of X dollars, which gets subtracted off the first part. Some people get confused. They only see the part of the exports and say, "Oh, hang on, I'm only getting this credit for the quarter. That's not a very large amount of money. So is that really all the solar is doing for me?" The answer is no. That's not all the solar is doing for you, because the other thing is you're importing a lot less from the grid than you would have if you didn't have solar, and that doesn't show up explicitly in your bill because the grid companies don't know about that. It's electricity that you've supplied direct from your own solar, and they don't even see it. So yeah, you are getting more benefit than what's obvious on your bill. Okay, so feed-in tariffs. So the amount that you get per unit of energy exported out to the grid. Let's just jump down to the bottom arrow there. Because that's where we are now and where we've been for the last several years in South Australia. So now it's basically a free market. Your electricity retailer that you've got a contract with, they can choose what that feed-in tariff is. And if you don't like it, then you can switch to a different electricity retailer that maybe offers a better deal. So that's the concept now. If we go back into the past, then there was more certainty about what the feed-in tariffs were. So 6 cents per kilowatt hour, for example. And if you go further back, there was a thing called a premium feed-in tariff, which if you got solar back in 2010 or 11, then you had to pay for a very expensive solar system back then, and because the prices of the systems hadn't come down, but you got a high feed-in tariff, like up to 50 cents per kilowatt hour, which you could still be receiving for the next few years. So yeah, but that's all closed to anyone installing solar now. Okay. Export limits. So when you install a solar system, so the rated power of your solar system, let's say it's 6 kilowatts. So that's what your solar system is rated to do from the solar panels under laboratory conditions with really good sunshine, shining at a right angle onto the panels, then your solar system would generate 6 kilowatts of power. So a kilowatt is kind of like a horsepower, like it's a power, instantaneous power. So it's a bit more than a horsepower. So that's great when the solar conditions are like ideal, but yeah, how much of the time are they that ideal? Either you'll have clouds in the way, or the angle will be wrong because the sun's just come up and it's coming at this angle instead of that angle, or the temperature be too hot. Solar panels don't really like it if it's hot. What they really like is sunny and cool. So most of the time, your system that's rated at 6 kilowatts, it might only be generating 2 kilowatts, 3 kilowatts, 4 kilowatts. It'll only be under those rare sort of perfect conditions that it actually hits that 6 kilowatt output. But this is a potential constraint because the company that owns the poles and wires, South Australia Power Networks, SAPN, they generally put a limit of how much you can export to the grid. So if you've got a normal kind of house with a normal switchboard and everything, then they'll probably say, okay, we don't want you to export any more than 5 kilowatts of power at any one time. So if you had perfect solar conditions and you weren't using much electricity in your house at all, then your solar system might have to back off a bit. It might have to reduce its output to avoid exceeding that 5 kilowatt export limit. So when people hear that and they go, oh, that's no good, you know, SAPN's restricting how much I can generate. But look, if you've got a 6 kilowatt or a 7 kilowatt system, you're really not going to lose out that much. I mean, because the times when the solar conditions are good enough to exceed your household power consumption and that 5 kilowatts is really going to be pretty rare. So it shouldn't be a big deal. Unless you're putting on like a really big system, like 10 kilowatts or 15 kilowatts, then if you're restricted to 5 kilowatts, then actually you could be losing a reasonable amount of your potential generation due to that export limit. The way things are going is to something a little more clever than just a flat 5 kilowatt export limit. They're moving towards flexible export limits, also known as dynamic export limits. And South Australia is actually the leader in this. So there's a bunch of suburbs where this already applies. So the good news with this new setup is instead of being limited to 5 kilowatts, you get a limit of 10. So that's good. I mean, if you've got a 6 or 7 kilowatt solar system, then 10 is way more than what you'd be possibly generating anyway. However, the flip side of that is, let's say it's a Sunday, it's mild weather, people don't have their air conditioners or heaters running, and it's really sunny. So what happens on a day like that or a time like that is you've got all of these solar systems on, almost half of the solar systems, almost half the houses in a suburb, and they're all trying to export into SAPN's poles and wires at the same time. And there isn't much activity going on in the suburb to soak up that electricity. So it starts to overload the poles and wires and transformers in the grid, in the local grid. So at times like that, what's going to happen is SAPN will send out a signal to your inverter saying, oh, okay, the general limit is 10 kilowatts, but at the moment we really need to ease everyone back. And so everyone's generation will be scaled back, or at least the people who were installed under this new system. If you had an old solar system from 3 or 4 years ago, then you wouldn't get scaled back like the newer people would. So yeah, in general, this is actually a good thing, because it doesn't make sense to have this sort of speed limit at times when the grid's actually not stressed. So if it's a hot day, right, for example, and there's air conditioners going at full blast right throughout your suburb, if you could export like 6 kilowatts, 8 kilowatts, 10 kilowatts, that would actually be good for everyone, and because you're exporting out of your meter and it's sort of going around the corner and it's being consumed by your neighbours. So yeah, that would actually help the grid. So having this flexibility is a good thing. Most people shouldn't have an issue with that, but if you did have some concerns about SAPN sending signals to your inverter to adjust its power level, then it's possible to opt out of that, but then you'll be slapped with a harsh export limit of 1.5 kilowatts. So if that's the case, then you probably want big batteries to soak up your solar during the day, or an electric vehicle or something else, and we'll talk about that later on. Okay, so export limits, something to be aware of, mostly if you're putting in a really big solar system. Otherwise, it shouldn't be a big deal. Okay, so typical household profile, they have this sort of double hump camel kind of chart. So they tend to have a bit of a morning peak, and then and then an evening peak, especially for households where people are out and about at work or school or whatever. So how does that match up to your solar generation? Well, not that great usually. This chart may be showing it a little bit extreme. I mean, it depends. In summer, like the sun might not be setting until 9 p.m. or something. So that you may actually still get good generation in your sort of evening peak. In winter, not so much. So we'll come back to that chart when we talk about batteries later on. Okay, so you've got an incentive to use electricity when the sun is shining. So if there are appliances that you can run during the day, then that's a good idea. I mean, obviously, most people aren't going to tie themselves in knots just to save a small amount of money per day. But yeah, if there's something you can do easily, pool pumps is a great example. If you can have that running on a timer during the sunny part of the day, great. Hot water systems is a really good one. So yeah, you might, that might be something to talk to your solar installer or solar retailer about. While you've got these electricians on site anyway, maybe they can see what's going on with your solar and how you can, set those timers so it works the best way. And there are even some smarter options than just a simple timer as well. Heating and cooling a house. So yeah, especially in summer, that's a fairly good correlation between air conditioning use and sun often. And yeah, so if you've got gas appliances, then you could think about going all electric instead, because you can't offset your gas directly with solar, but you can offset electric appliances with solar. Heating is a bit of a tricky one because the times when you're probably going to use the most heating is the middle of winter when it's probably cloudy or dark. So that's not going to correlate super well with solar, but still, even in winter, you do get some clear cold days when the sun's actually pretty strong. And electric vehicles is another. They can soak up a fair bit of solar energy. All right, batteries. Now this picture I think is from back in 2015. One of the first households in Australia to have a Tesla Powerwall installed. That was the first sort of wave of media excitement about batteries. Okay, so why get a battery? So really what they're about is storing renewable energy for later use. So you can save money off your bills. So if you put on solar, then you're already saving money off your bills. A battery is an optional add-on onto a solar system, and that enables you to save even some more money off your bills. Tariff arbitrage, so that's talking about charging up your battery with when electricity is cheap, and then if you have expensive tariffs like peak tariffs around the evening, then you're discharging your battery at those expensive times to avoid having to import that expensive electricity from the grid. Keep electricity on during a grid blackout. So if the battery's set up the right way, then that can be achieved. So you can be resilient to those sorts of outages. It can help with local grid issues, so high voltage. So it's a bit of a symptom of issues in the local grid. And when that happens, your solar inverter may throttle itself back. So if you've got batteries soaking up power in the middle of the day, that's less likely to happen. And yeah, support new technology. And number 8 is to go off-grid. Okay, so when we say off-grid, we mean proper off-grid, where you've severed your cable connecting you to the poles and wires. So yes, that is possible in the suburbs. It's usually not advisable because if you wanted to go fully off-grid, then you need to somehow get through those weeks when it's really cloudy and say winter, for example, and you may want heating, etc. So yeah, that can be quite a challenge, but it's usually better to maintain your connection to the grid, even if you've got a battery, so everything can work together and balance each other out. Okay, so batteries, sustainability. Yeah, usually not much of a direct environmental benefit from a battery, because it's not actually generating energy. It's not directly displacing any more centralized generation in the grid. All it's doing is time shifting your generation. And in fact, you do have a bit of losses in the battery as well. So yeah, probably about 10%. So if you're charging up the battery with 10 kilowatt hours of energy, then when you discharge it, you only get around 9 kilowatt hours back again. So there's no sort of free lunch there. And the economics of batteries, well, it depends. Basically, most households, yeah, it's hard to make an economic case just for bill savings on a battery, because you're putting in the solar anyway. So you're going to have a small bill after that. If you go and put a battery on as well, then you'll have an even smaller bill, but the battery is probably going to cost you more than the rest of the solar system did. So that additional bill savings is probably not that economic, and your payback time is probably going to actually increase. So we were talking about a 5-year payback time for solar alone. For solar and a battery, you're maybe looking at 7, 8, 9, 10-year payback time. So if you're going to do it, then it's probably more about other benefits rather than just direct bill saving. So yeah, for example, if you had a big solar system, you had lots of excess solar, you were going to be exporting a lot out to the grid, then yeah, it may start to make more sense. Okay, how do batteries work? Back to our familiar pattern, but now we've got this extra battery down the bottom there. Solar batteries don't actually look like that, by the way. That looks more like a car battery, but yeah, just for the sake of the diagram. So now we've got power going into the inverter, and in this example, it can be charging up the battery as well as sending power into your switchboard. So the standard logic would be, okay, if we've got excess solar, then try and use that to charge up the battery, in preference to exporting it out to the grid. And vice versa, if we've got a shortfall of solar and we need to import power from the grid, well, discharge from the battery to avoid those grid imports as much as you can. Yep. Okay, so information resources on batteries. There's a whole bunch of those. We've got Renew magazine. There's a list of approved batteries by the Clean Energy Council. Solar Quotes. So it's a company based in South Australia. It has a whole bunch of information on all sorts of solar and battery technology, and also have a method to put you in touch with solar retailers to get quotes for an installation. So they've got a good table of like all or most of the batteries that are currently available in Australia. And yeah, some benchmark pricing there from Solar Choice. Okay, so how do you get the most out of your battery? So yeah, with this picture here, this is the Tesla Powerwall 2. You might notice it looks a little bit different from the original Tesla Powerwall in the previous picture. So there's plenty of battery models out there. Tesla's probably has the best brand recognition, and it is a pretty big seller in the market as well. So that's probably why it tends to get used as an example a fair bit. Okay, so this chart now. So we've got your solar generation around the middle of the day, but your rather than just exporting that out to the grid, a chunk of that green chunk there might be stored into the battery, and then the battery discharges to use in around that evening time and the morning time. Now, electric hot water. So this is not technically a battery, but it can effectively store energy, because when you've got a hot water tank, so that's full of hot water, that's what you're going to use for your showers in the evening or the next morning. The tank has insulation in it, so it's not going to lose much of the heat, like over a day or two. So if you're heating up your hot water using electricity from your solar panels, then yeah, it's a great way to store energy. And a hot water tank is a lot cheaper than a battery, basically. Virtual power plants. So this is kind of like if you're getting a battery, then there are companies out there that will give you a discounted battery. They'll give you some financial incentives if they get to have a bit of a say in when your battery charges and discharges. So why would they want to do that? Well, it's because, say, your electricity retailer, so AGL or Origin or whoever it is, they have to pay for the electricity that you're importing from the grid on the wholesale electricity market. So yeah, they're selling you electricity, but they have to buy it from somewhere. And there are times when that price that they have to buy, it can skyrocket up to eye-watering prices. If you think retail electricity prices are high, then yeah, wait till you see what the wholesale price is at these critical times. Like, it might only be a couple of times a year, but so it actually saves your retail a lot of money if you can discharge a battery during that sort of 10 minutes or whatever it is, and it'll reduce how much electricity they have to buy on the market. So that's an example of a virtual power plant. You might get a battery at a discounted price in return for your battery being taken control of, hopefully just a handful of times a year, and discharge, for example. So there's a range of virtual power plants out there. Like, each one is a different deal. It's like a contract, got fine print. So you do have to be aware of what you're getting into. For example, is there a limit to how much they can mess with your battery, or might they be doing it every day? And so you might not be receiving the same bill saving benefit as what you were thinking you would. So if you're going into one of these VPPs, then you have to really look into the details of what they're offering you. Okay, so the last section, buying a solar and or battery system. So things to think about. How much per year do you spend on energy? So it might be $2,000 a year or $3,000 a year. Just talking about the stationary energy, so what's being used in the home. So that might be across electricity, mains gas, bottled gas, which is LPG, firewood, for example. What types of appliances? So what do you use for heating, cooking, hot water? Are they electric? Are they gas? Are they something else? What are your priorities? Is it bill savings, environment? For most people, it's a bit of a mix, but I think the economics is probably predominant for most households. Do you have a sunny roof? Have you got room for solar panels? Are there trees shading it, which can be that can really cut back your generation? Another one I would add would be, how long are you expecting to stay in this house? So, if you might be moving out in 6 months or a year or two, then you might not want to overcapitalize on investing in solar and batteries if you may not be around to recoup those benefits over several years. Okay, so what size solar or battery should I get? Well, there's a bunch of resources here. I won't read them all out, but I guess the basic thing I would say is that the most common size system out there is around the 6.66 kilowatt, so 13 panels, 14 solar panels. And yeah, look, for average size, average sort of consuming household, that actually is a pretty good sort of size. In summer, you're going to generate a lot more than what you're using on a typical day. Especially a summer day, you'll be exporting a lot. In winter, you may be importing a lot from the grid even during the day. So, it sort of swings and roundabouts. But as an overall benchmark, it actually seems like a really reasonably good size, that sort of 6.66 kilowatt solar system. If your roof space nicely fits sort of 4 kilowatts or 7, then yeah, you might just say, okay, well, let's just go for panels that sort of nicely fit that roof area. By the way, north, east, and west doesn't matter that much these days. Eastern, if you have some panels east and some panels west, based on where your roof surfaces are pointing, that's pretty good for generating in the morning, like from the east panels, and in the evening from the west panels. Over the year, compared to north facing, you might lose maybe 10 or 15% of the overall generation, but it actually spreads it out quite nicely over the day. If you're looking at winter consumption, then north facing is good for winter. So solar, okay. If you're thinking about going all electric and going off gas appliances, if you're thinking about charging an electric vehicle during the day, installing a pool, or any of these other sort of major electricity consuming appliances, then yeah, you might want to consider going a fair bit bigger than the sort of average size. If you've got an electric vehicle and you're driving a lot, like every day, and then you're home a few times a week, and you're charging that vehicle up from solar, then yeah, that could actually soak up quite a lot. Size of battery, well, yeah, I think we mentioned that in a couple of other slides coming up, so I might hold off on commenting on that one. Okay, so battery pitfalls to avoid. Right, so the picture has an example of batteries from BYD, which is a big Chinese company you might have heard of. So those are lithium batteries, which are really the pretty much all home solar batteries are some type of lithium battery these days. If we go back, 5 or 10 years, then there might have been, say 10 or 15 years, lead acid might have been more common. The battery inverter here is a Cellectronic SP Pro, which is a really solid, high reputation Australian-made inverter. So that's a specific to battery systems. And these two other inverters are Fronius inverters to gather electricity from the solar panels. So that's a pretty big system there, and a very capable one, which would be able to run during a blackout as well as when the grid's up and running. So yeah, if you want that capability, then you have to think about, well, how much electricity would I be consuming overnight? If I have a multi-day blackout, is the system capable of having the solar panels operating even when there's no grid connection? The one that we're looking at here, and a Tesla Powerwall, for example, can do that, but there are some others that can't. So if you want to be able to get through a multi-day blackout with your solar generation, then that's an important capability. So look, as a rule of thumb for battery sizing, 10 kilowatt hours, maybe 15 kilowatt hours, this is something around that sort of size would be quite useful in a grid blackout. It's probably going to have a good power capability to run several appliances at once in the house. Like even it can even run an oven, for example, if you're not running too many other things at the same time. So yeah, I'd say maybe 10 kilowatt hour to 15 kilowatt hour is a reasonable size. If you go for a really small battery, then you sort of you end up paying. You're going to be paying for like labor and installation and different bits and pieces of equipment anyway. So your cost per usable energy storage capacity might go up. So you can get smaller batteries, but yeah, it can challenge the economics as well if you go too small. Locations for batteries. Okay, so there's an Australian standard that came out several years ago now, which has requirements on where batteries can be located, and they're mostly around the potential for a battery to burn if there's a fire. So even if the fire started somewhere else, if it gets to the battery, then some types of batteries can actually burn pretty fiercely. So in general, you're looking at a battery, well, either in a shed, as we have here, or in a garage, or on an external wall of the house, probably. And if it's on the external wall of the house, then you're probably going to need that to be some sort of fire-resistant material. So it might already be a brick wall, or if it's weatherboard, then the solar installer is probably going to put a big sheet of fibre cement up on the wall where the battery will go. And that has to go for like 900 millimeters above the battery and 600 millimeters each side of the battery. So yeah, finding a suitable place can be a hassle in some properties. You don't want the battery to get too hot, like if it got the afternoon sun beating down on it in summer, then that's not great. If it's in the garage, the Australian standard would probably also require a bollard to be in place to protect it against car bumpers. Check out your warranties. All right, I'm going to have to speed up, I think. We've got too many slides. Okay, so if you're buying a solar system, one thing to be aware of is there's generally two companies that you'll be dealing with. There's a solar retailer, and so they're the ones selling you the system and managing the deal, doing the quote and all that. And there's also solar installers. So these days, usually the solar installer is like a subcontractor. So they're the tradies who are actually doing the work. And they need to have someone accredited as a solar installer by the Clean Energy Council, and that's an individual. How do you choose a solar retailer? Well, there's a bunch of ways here. Word of mouth. Are they an approved seller, approved retailer under this code of conduct? Warranties, of course, and there are some places where you can go to easily get multiple quotes. As with any kind of home improvement, I guess, if you're doing renovation or installing a deck or a swimming pool or whatever, you'd want to have a few quotes. Now, there are a few cowboy installers out there, as with any industry, like builders or whatever. Luckily, there's not that many. But yeah, it's good to be alert, I guess, and aware of what's going on. So you're dealing with the solar retailer. They're quoting you for a solar system. Ideally, they would have someone come out on site to have a look at your switchboard, have a look at your roof, where are the cables going to go. But these days, everyone's trying to keep costs down, and site visits for quotes actually adds up with the cost. So most of the time, they're just quoting based on aerial photography and photos, that type of stuff. So questions for the solar retailer would be, okay, if they're going to use a subcontractor to come and do the job, how do they ensure good quality? And does the solar retailer take full responsibility for the whole job? So if anything falls between the cracks, you don't want the installer and the retailer like pointing fingers at each other, right? When they give you a quote, is it nice and clear? Okay, I can see where the panels are going to go on the roof. Yep, the inverter must be going there. Is everything understood? And then on the day of install, when the tradies arrive, yeah, is this CEC accredited solar installer there? Can you speak to the accredited installer? They must be present at key times in the installation, like when the system's being all hooked up and tested at the end, and when the inverter's going in, all that kind of stuff. It is allowable for the installer to go off and split their time between a couple of different jobs on different buildings, but they have to at least be there at those key times. Are you getting the brand and model of the solar panel and the inverter that you were quoted for? So, yeah, look, there are cases where there's a bit of a switch that occurs, and it's often quite innocent, because like the panels, for example, are coming through a wholesaler, and you were quoted on the previous model, and they've run out of that, and now they're on the new model. It may be even better than the panel that you were quoted on. So, okay, that's no problem. But yeah, you don't want to have a switch out with a panel that's not quite as good. Is the solar installer definitely going to put the panels and inverter where you expect them to? There have been cases where the quote said, well, the panels will go here. And then when the installer turns up, they realize that that's actually going to be a real hassle for them for some reason, like maybe where they can get the cables through, and they end up somehow putting the panels somewhere a bit different. So yeah, I would definitely talk to them about that and just make sure everyone's clear on exactly what's going to happen. And at the end of the job, they should be doing a full handover. So you've got some documentation, you know how to monitor your system, how to check that it's operating properly, all that kind of stuff. Warranties. I won't read through all this, but yeah, with panels, you've got a performance warranty and a product warranty. Really, it's the product warranty which is the important one. And yeah, with batteries, the warranty. So batteries do degrade over time. You'd be aware of that with your mobile phones, for example. Luckily, the batteries the cells in a solar battery are managed better. They have a good battery management system that should keep the batteries operating at a good temperature and good voltages and all that stuff. So you'd expect them to, after 10 years, they should still be achieving 80 or 60% at least of their initial capacity. So check what the warranty says about that. Okay, that's it. I think we've gone slightly over time on the presentation, but I think this is the point where we can go over for questions that I think one of the other people on the panel was going to pick out some questions, perhaps.
Terrific, thanks, Andrew. That's it's a really terrific insight into the economics and the technology of solar and batteries. Yeah, each time I hear anyone talk about solar and batteries, it's continually changing. There's always new insights. So thanks for all of those thoughts. Something I heard the other day was a comment to the effect of daytime is becoming the new off peak due to the solar uptake and prevalence, which is a pretty exciting thought to have. Something I really got out of early in your slides there was the cost of installing solar in South Australia. How terrific to see that we're up to 20% cheaper than some of the other states in that front. So that's a really good incentive right there to get installing. Look, there's some really good comments and some resources in the chat function there. There's a couple of questions here and there. Andrew, I think you might have a few questions you would have received prior to the session, so feel free to take the reins, and if you've got one or two questions you think are really going to hit the mark and you haven't answered already, please, please do so.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm happy to delve into some of those questions that came through previously. Just on your point about the middle of the day becoming the new off-peak period. There's a tariff being offered by SAPN, South Australia Power Networks, which would be passed on through some retailers at least, called the Solar Soaker tariff. So what that's doing is it's providing benefits to households that don't have panels on their own roof, and because it's giving them cheap electricity around the middle of the day, as a recognition that it's a time when there is starting to be an oversupply of power on many days. So yeah, it's things are changing for sure. Okay, so some questions. I've got pages of questions here, so it's a bit hard to just pick one out. Okay, any solar solutions for roofs with brittle clay tiles? Okay, so clay tiles, as they age, they do tend to get more fragile. So that, look, if the tiles are really fragile, then just having the solar installers on your roof walking risks cracking some of them. So if you're going down that route, with the old brittle tiles, then you really want to have some spare tiles handy of the same type, so that if some do crack, then just they can be swapped in fairly easily. But installing, so probably the best option, if your roof's getting to the stage where it's going to need a replacement, in the next 5 years or whatever, then you may actually be better off just holding off on the solar until you've got a good solid roof, and this is saving up some money for that event, I would say. Okay, batteries, how they work. Can they be retrofitted? Right, that's something we don't have so much on in the original presentation. So if you're installing a new solar system and a battery at the same time, then there's a couple of options for how the battery can be integrated. If you've got an existing solar system and you want to add a battery on, then the options narrow down a little bit, but it's still not bad. So if you're retrofitting, the most likely way it's going to happen is the battery will come in, and the battery has a cable that goes to your switchboard, your standard household switchboard with those safety switches that you flick up to reset them when something trips off. So the battery's not connecting directly into your solar system. It's not going straight to your panels or your inverter. It's really sort of a separate unit that's going into your switchboard. And the battery will have a sensor, so it knows how much power you're importing from the grid. So it says, okay, I'm importing 2 kilowatts, so I'm going to start discharging at 2 kilowatts to cancel that out, and vice versa. So that's called AC coupled, and because alternating current is the power that's in your switchboard. So that's a pretty good option, and for example, that's what the Tesla Powerwall does. There's a bunch of other batteries, the N-phase batteries. They operate that way. So if you're retrofitting, then that's probably what's going to happen. If you're installing a battery along with the new solar system, then it's quite valid to do that as well. You also have the option of having a battery that just connects straight into your solar inverter, as we had in that little diagram. So that's called DC coupling, and that has some efficiency advantages. So both of them are good options, basically.
Andrew, I've got one here that I might contribute here. Esteban mentions that in the chat that if someone installed panels back in 2010, and then added new panels onto the array in 2020, how could the retailer or Sapin distinguish between the kilowatt hours generated from the first and the second install? What do you say?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So if you install solar panels back in 2010, then you'll still be on that good feed-in tariff that we talked about, and that still goes until 2028. But you probably put in quite a small solar system at that time, like maybe 2 kilowatts, 3 kilowatts maximum, probably, because panels were so expensive in those days. If you're looking at now topping that up with basically a second solar system, firstly, to my understanding, I think if you do that, then technically you lose your eligibility for that premium feed-in tariff. So
as well,
yeah. So if Sapin is on the ball and checking, then they could be looking at aerial photography for solar panels. They might be looking to see how much power you're exporting to the grid at any point in time. And if you only had a 2 kilowatt solar system and now you're suddenly exporting 5 kilowatts at times, then that's pretty obvious. So yeah, you might risk losing that high feed-in tariff. Whether they actually are sort of actively looking for that or not, I'm not sure, but yeah, there is that risk.
Certainly. And if I can add another one, earlier you mentioned Enphase. Enphase is a microinverter. Tony asks if you could comment on the pros and the cons of microinverters, and in what situations are they preferred compared to a single inverter?
Sure. Okay. So the diagrams we had, there was like a single inverter on the wall of the house, and it has the cables coming from the panels into the inverter. That's the standard sort of majority of systems are like that. There's another option which has no inverter on the wall. Instead, each panel has a little inverter underneath it, up on the roof. And so one obvious advantage of that is you don't have to find a place on a wall to put an inverter. So if you're in a townhouse or something, then that can actually be a bit of a constraint. Another advantage is each panel is now going to operate individually. So with a normal system, you have like a string of panels. You might have 10 panels or 8 panels, like all daisy chained like onto a single cable, basically, passing the electricity down the chain. And the panels do have some clever ways that they can like bow out of the system and still pass the power through. Like if there's a big shadow falling on one panel, like a chimney, for example, there are ways that they can still pass the power along. But to get the most out of like a shade situation where you've got like, scattered trees or something, and you've got this panel shaded, this panel and that panel, and they're shaded, but their neighbors are not shaded, then yeah, microinverters is a way to get the most benefits out of, the most power out of those type of shade situations. So that's one option. One scenario where microinverters might be warranted. Another is where you've got one of these really fancy architectural roofs that doesn't have like a big flat surface. You've got like all these little hips and gables on the roof, and so you have to have one panel here, one panel facing that way, one panel facing that way. And yeah, so that's another situation where microinverters would be good.
Terrific. Just is your sense that that's kind of the new frontier, microinverters? Is that the way panel manufacturers are heading, or is it just nice to have?
Look, I reckon it's probably still going to be more of a niche rather than sort of taking over the mainstream. They do tend to be more expensive than just a standard single inverter on the wall. Yeah, that's the main sort of downside of the microinverters. In America, they're more popular because they have some additional requirements to be able to shut off the power at the roof. So like with with a standard system with the inverter on the wall, yeah, there's an isolator switch there, so you can turn off the cable that's coming down from the panels, but you've still got live power up at the panels and in that cable that's coming down off the roof. So if you're super concerned about like the safety of firefighters, if in a situation where you have a house fire and they have to come in the building and you've got live cables coming through a broken roof or something, then yeah, microinverters have that capability to sort of switch off the power at the panel. But to be honest, that hasn't been a major focus in Australia. So yeah, I'd see microinverters still being more of a niche for those sorts of specific situations rather than, you know, taking over the market.
Okay, terrific. No, good to know.
Would you like me to answer a few more out of the previous list?
Yeah. If you see some that jump out, please.
Okay. How do you choose a solar panel? Good question. The brand of solar panel, the panel manufacturing is really matured, like in the last 15 years, say. China dominates the market for manufacturing solar panels, as they do most other things these days. And the panel quality is really pretty impressive. There's not many brands that you would say, oh no, that's real cheap and nasty anymore. Solar Quotes actually have a couple of good sort of infographics where they sort of rank different brands of solar panels and solar inverters. So which ones have a reputation for better build quality and reliability. So that's one way you can do it. Some people have a preference for non-Chinese products, just due to trade and geopolitical type factors. And if that's the case, there are some panels that are made in Korea, like Singapore, REC panels, REC. There are some that are made in other Asian countries. You might even be able to find one or two that are made in Germany, but that's pretty rare these days. So that might be a criteria for you. But generally there's not that much to choose from in between the different brands of panels these days. Oh, sorry, someone just mentioned Tindo. I totally slipped my mind. That's a very, very good point. And so that's a Australian panel manufacturer. They're not manufacturing the cells, but they are assembling the panels, and they've upgraded their factory in the last year or two as well. They're not the cheapest product, as you would expect, but yeah, if you're looking for Australian made, then that is the option. Yeah.
I'm glad that was mentioned from the audience. I couldn't mention a brand, but look, hats off to Tinder. They're in Adelaide, in fact. So again, a good local product. That's again, worth a look at for sure. Yeah. There's a comment and a couple of questions here. A couple around batteries, but before that, there's a question around: is it worth? I'm a sole occupant in a house. Is it worth me installing solar? Wonder what you might say to that.
Well, as I was mentioning, like the number of occupants isn't necessarily the primary factor these days. Like you could be a sole occupant, but you've got a swimming pool pump and you've got electric hot water and you're planning on buying an electric vehicle in the next year or two. In that case, your electricity consumption could be quite high, but that would be a good thing in that example, because you wouldn't be consuming gas or petrol, that type of stuff. So look, if you're sole occupant and you're not using that much electricity, like maybe 10 kilowatt hours a day or something like that, I would say yeah, solar system still is worthwhile. Just with the prices of solar systems and the paybacks that you can achieve, then I would say in most cases, yeah, I'd go for a solar system, and maybe a little smaller than average. But if you start going really small, then you hit this issue of economies of scale where the retailers and the installers have like fixed costs associated with every install. So
Yeah,
if you go too small, then the price per panel starts to creep up. So
certainly.
yeah, look, especially if you got options for electrifying some of your appliances and stuff like that, then yeah, in general, I think I probably would put in solar. Yeah.
Terrific. No, that's some good thoughts there. A few more questions coming in the chat side there. So thanks, audience. Keep those coming. It's a good opportunity to have some live responses to your thoughts here and now. So Molly asks about the presentation. The prices that you showed in the presentation for the typical solar systems, do these already include the rebate, the STC's rebate that you referred to?
Yes, they do.
It did. Okay, that's good to know. So hopefully it's a good answer to you, Jacqueline or Molly, or both. And Dan, you're very active in the chat. Thank you. Thoughts on battery and the time of use tariff, the TOU tariff, rather than solar for an apartment or a house with no solar PV opportunity?
Right. So battery with no solar. Yeah. So time of use tariff. There's different flavors of them around, I guess, but you're generally looking at expensive electricity in the evening and then maybe on weekdays rather than weekends, and cheaper electricity at other times. I would think that if you've just got a tariff like that, then a battery with no solar is unlikely to be economic. If you can get a solar soaker tariff where you get sort of almost free electricity around the middle of the day, then it might start to get a little bit more feasible, but you'd probably want to run some numbers on it and say, okay, 10 kilowatt hour battery, let's say I can charge it up in the middle of the day with 10 kilowatt hours. How much is that going to cost me per day? And then I'll be discharging at 9 kilowatt hours because of the efficiency at night time, and that'll be saving me this much. But you also want to allow for the fact that you're not going to be there every day. Like you might go away for holidays or whatever, you go out for dinner. So there might be some days when you actually, even though you might have 9 kilowatt hours to discharge, you might only discharge 5 kilowatt hours in that day. So rather than a full discharge every day, you might on average only get 80% of a full discharge. So yeah, if you're looking at doing something creative, I'd allow for all those factors, and also the fact that the battery is going to reduce its capacity over say 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good insights. Hopefully, Dan, that sort of answers your question around the time of use. And Dan, I know you've put a comment of the 8 cents a kilowatt hour between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. at the moment.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But is that just the network component, the SAPN component, or is that a retail tariff?
Dan, perhaps you can answer in your in the text in the chat there, Dan. Is that including
retail? Okay, that's getting quite interesting then, because if you were if you can charge it with your battery really for only 8 cents per kilowatt hour, and then you may be paying say 40 cents a kilowatt hour in the evening, then so you've got maybe like a 32 cent spread, that might almost get there. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, another plug, Dan. You're doing it well for the another local outfit, IO Energy.
Yeah.
Very good. Anthony asks in the quick question and answers, is it possible this is probably similar to an earlier question, is it possible to add panels to an older existing system? He's got a 2 kilowatt system currently.
It's problematic. There's a few reasons for that. There's Australian standards that govern the installation of solar systems, and also just standard wiring rules for the cables and everything, and they change over time. And so if you've got an old solar system and say the inverter dies and you just need to replace the inverter like for like, then that's something that can usually be done without triggering an upgrade of your whole system to meet the current standards. But if you're going to add panels, then that probably does trigger a requirement in the rules or the standards that, okay, if you're going to add panels, then that means you have to bring everything up to current specs. So that means that the cables going down through your walls, when they did it, they could just have a bare cable going down, but now they have to put conduit, for example, like one of those metal or plastic tubes to protect the cables. The switches that were used may not comply. So there's all that, and there's also the factor that if a new tradie is coming in and they work on this old system, then they're probably going to be held responsible for the whole system, including the workmanship that was done by the previous guy years ago. And they're probably, a bit wary of taking that responsibility, which is understandable, I think. So, adding panels into an old solar system, generally it's not that practical. So, usually what they do is either they'll put in a second inverter to take the power from the new set of panels they put on the roof, or alternatively, depending on how old the old system is, and if the panels are not as efficient as what the new ones are, then it may even make sense to remove the old system and just put a big new system in instead. Which
it's a can of worms, and we won't perhaps open that can right now, but it leads to the question of recycling of panels. But that's perhaps for another webinar, I dare say, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, just quickly, they can be recycled. What's really needed is some tough intervention from the governments and the rule makers to ensure that they are recycled, as they have in Europe, for example.
Indeed, I believe there's a stewardship scheme in the making, but watch this space. A couple of points about questions, really, about community batteries. So Peter asks about if you've got any comments around community batteries. And an earlier question prior to the session was, is there an ideal number of homes for a community battery?
Okay. Community batteries, there's a bit of a gap between what the common perception of a community battery is and what it really is. So people tend to think, we've got this, say, a dead-end street with like 20 houses in it. We put the battery in, and then that battery is going to supply that street. And if you have a grid blackout, then that battery can keep supplying those houses through the grid blackout. If there's solar panels on one house, then they'll be able to charge up the battery, and the neighbour will be able to take power out of the battery, and you'll basically be able to sell solar power in between you for a very low cost. That's the kind of concept people have with community batteries. Unfortunately, it's not really true, at least not yet. Sharing solar power in between like neighbours, there's been it's the roadblocks in the way are about the rules and the metering. So as soon as the electricity goes through a billing meter on the front of your house, then Sapin is going to take their cut. So they're going to be taking 10, 15 cents, 20 cents, whatever it is. So that kind of really sort of makes it problematic in any of these schemes for sharing the solar around in between the households. There have been rule change requests to try and get around that barrier, but yeah, the rule maker knocked it back, unfortunately. This is years ago. So in the future, that might change, but at the moment, community batteries, they're less about really sort of sharing energy, and it's more about just having a battery in the grid that can help with some of the grid issues like high voltages, excess of solar exports, overloading the local poles and wires and that kind of stuff. And the islanding in a blackout, there's been a bunch of community batteries that have gone in so far. None of them have had that islanding component. That's really something for the future as well. So yeah, I'd say watch this space. Have a look at announcements as they come out about community batteries. Yeah, but yeah, just be aware that they may not really do what you're hoping for. Sorry.
Terrific. Look, I think we're really closing in towards the end of the webinar, and there's a few more questions still coming. I wouldn't mind just closing off on a couple of them if we could, Andrew. Look, okay, let's go to, there's two more about batteries. Terrific. What have we got here? Renew probably asked a question that is on the tip of our tongues as well about if I'd like to, if I want to ride an EV in the next few years, is it worth getting a battery for the house, or should I just try and use the EV battery for the home? Could that work?
I think that's a very relevant question, especially since in most cases a battery isn't really that economic just for bill savings at the moment. So, okay, so the idea of using an electric vehicle is using it as a battery on wheels, right? So you say in a few years' time, the concept is I buy an electric vehicle, I install a wall charger in my garage or whatever, so I can plug the plug into the car to charge up the car. But that same wall charger, it can also accept power coming out of the car's battery to put power into the house, like a solar inverter does, right? So solar inverter is putting power into your house, and your EV charger could be doing that as well. And it could be doing that at night. So it's sort of doing this. The car's doing the same role as what a solar battery would do. I think that's actually going to really take off when the standards are there. That's really what's holding up at the moment is, okay, there's a couple of cars that can do it. There's the Nissan Leaf, there's the Mitsubishi Outlander. They can put power back into your home, but there's a lot of roadblocks. They use a sort of obsolete method, which is going to need a really expensive wall charger to achieve it. But the standard plug for virtually every EV that's being sold now will be able to do it through like a normal sort of wall charger, which should be not much more expensive than the current ones that are going out for, like, you can buy them for $1,500 for a wall charger. And you're buying the car battery anyway for transport. So you're sort of getting a battery for free, except that you can only use it while the car's parked at your house. That's the main sort of limitation. But yeah, I actually think that's going to be a big thing. And if it was me, if I was considering getting a battery after, say, 2025 or 2026, when hopefully the new equipment will be available, if you don't have a pressing need for a solar battery now, then yeah, I would seriously consider saving up that money that you're going to spend on the solar battery and save it up for an EV in a few years. Yeah.
True. No, it's good clever thought. And further comment to that is there's an earlier recording of an EV webinar which touches on this topic. So that's a little refresher reminder to go back to the recordings and see what is said there. There was a quick comment on question really, is there any concession for seniors in terms of price, upfront pricing, or?
For solar systems, no, certainly not that I'm aware of. There are obviously concessions available for like electricity bills. And if you are in any sort of concessionary status or hardship situation, then make sure you speak to your electricity retailer and make sure that you're getting every sort of concession that you're entitled to. But in terms of solar and batteries, I'm not aware of anything for that.
Yeah, no worries. Look, thanks, Andrew. Actually, Rochelle does have quite a specific question, which might be better dealt with directly. But if you feel appropriate to answer this question, it's quite specific. But it might be a last for the evening, everybody. So if we wanted to electrify a house, what's the right sequence? Currently, she has gas, hot water, and an oven stove.
Usually the right sequence is the first one to electrify is the first one which is going to wear out and need replacing anyway. Because most people aren't going to like throw away a perfectly good appliance that's got years of life left in it. You're more likely to wait until it's at its end of life and then replace it. The exception might be the cooktop, because if you've got a mains gas cooktop, they actually don't use a high volume of gas, and you're going to be paying your daily supply charge just to have your gas connection. So you end up with like really expensive cooking if that's your only gas user. So if you've replaced your other appliances like your hot water and your heating as they wore out, and you're just left with your cooktop, then I would say, you can go ahead and switch over to induction and eliminate that gas bill entirely at that stage.
True. Well, there's a thought, maybe, Rochelle, to your answer. Well, that brings us sort of to the end of the session, everybody. So again, thank you, Andrew, for your insights and time. All those slides, there's so much in there. And it's a really, really good way to unpack the complexities. So thank you. There will be, as per the chat there's a link to all the previous recordings, and this one will be up in the next day or week or so, and the link will be shared to you as a participant of this session. There are some. You'll also get a survey if you'd like to fill that in. That'll only help to inform us all about how the session, what to add to future sessions, Q's and A's and such. So that'll be welcome if you could fill in that survey when it does come through. And in terms of next sessions, we've got a couple coming up in, next Tuesday, in fact. There's another add-on to this session here. It's if you've got solar and you're new to batteries, you might find that fits your boat. And you might join that one next Tuesday. Feel free to sign up and get some of those further insights. And on Thursday, 16th November, there's a summer comfort webinar. And there's another one for renters as well. So again, check that website and sign up for those coming up. And there's further wider webinars also presented by Renew through November around resilient bushfire design as part of the Beyond BAL project, which would be quite fascinating as we head into summer, of course. Well, that about wraps it up. I'd just like to thank the Renew team, Laurie, James, John, and the team for setting this session up. And it's been really insightful. And thanks again to our resident expert, really, Andrew. Thanks again.